Canada and Denmark just tightened their Arctic alignment at the exact moment Greenland publicly rejected Washington's overtures. Whether the White House admits it or not, the United States has suddenly lost negotiating space in the most strategic corner of the North Atlantic. This is the first time Greenland's leadership has openly chosen Copenhagen and Europe over the U.S. And as NATO increases its focus on Arctic security, with Canada strengthening its role inside that strategic discussion, Donald Trump now finds himself holding far fewer cards than he expected.
Now we are faced with a geopolitical crisis, and if we have to choose between the United States and Denmark here and now, then we choose Denmark. We choose NATO.
The solution to the security needs of Greenland, but the entire Arctic region, is coordinated through NATO. First and foremost, Canada will take responsibility for our Arctic, but working in conjunction with others. We have close and deepening cooperation with the Nordic-Baltic 8 group of countries.
The pivot became unmistakable when Greenland's Prime Minister Jens Frederik Nielsen delivered a line no American official wanted to hear. If Greenland must choose between the United States and Denmark, it chooses Denmark, chooses NATO, and chooses the European Union. It was a declaration made with full awareness of the geopolitical moment. Greenland is not dancing around the issue anymore. It has drawn a clear line about who it trusts to manage Arctic security and economic development. Trump's response was blunt and dismissive. He claimed not to know who the Greenlandic leader is, brushing off the statement as irrelevant. Yet inside Washington, the message landed with weight. Greenland is home to rare earth deposits, the deep-water access points critical to North Atlantic defense, and the GIUK gap that shapes NATO surveillance of Russian submarines. Losing influence in Greenland is not symbolic, it is strategic. As this unfolds, Denmark and Greenland have begun reinforcing their ties across Europe. Their coordinated visits to Berlin and Paris are not ceremonial tours. They signal a deliberate choice to anchor Greenland's future inside the European security architecture. And it is this European alignment that puts Canada into an unexpectedly powerful position. Prime Minister Mark Carney, already responding to Trump's tariff threats and preparing Canada for the 2026 USMCA review, has reoriented Canada's Arctic strategy around NATO and multilateral cooperation. In recent speeches, he has made it clear that Canada will pursue a more independent path, strengthening relationships with Nordic and Baltic partners, and reframing Arctic security as a collective responsibility, not a bilateral power struggle. That position aligns almost perfectly with Denmark's, and it reinforces the idea that the Arctic should be governed by predictable alliances rather than transactional politics.
Washington entered the Greenland conversation believing pressure tactics would create leverage. The assumption was simple: raise economic stakes, dial up the rhetoric, and push Denmark and Greenland into negotiations they would rather avoid. But the Arctic is no longer an empty chessboard. Europe is more unified after years of geopolitical shocks. Greenland has grown more assertive about its autonomy, and NATO is watching the region closely as Russia expands its northern presence and China positions itself in Arctic shipping routes. Greenland's public rejection of the United States was not an emotional flare-up. It reflected a structural choice. Greenland wants security and development frameworks built on respect for sovereignty. It wants partnerships that recognize its political agency. By framing the issue around alliances rather than deals, Greenland essentially removed Washington's preferred method of negotiation from the table. Trump's dismissal of Greenland's leadership may have played well domestically, but on the international stage, it confirmed the perception that Washington underestimates smaller partners. And in the Arctic, where legitimacy is built on cooperation, that misstep matters.
Canada did not force itself into this story. It simply arrived with the right message at the right time. After facing tariff threats directly linked to Arctic disagreements, Ottawa accelerated 3 transformations: economic diversification away from America, stronger Arctic diplomacy with Nordic partners, and a clear emphasis on NATO coordination instead of bilateral improvised deals. Carney's recent comments captured this shift directly. Canada will support Arctic security through NATO. Canada will deepen ties across the Nordic and Baltic regions, and Canada will take a more assertive stance on issues that affect Arctic sovereignty, including Greenland. This positions Canada as a stabilizing partner at a time when Europe is wary of unpredictable signals from Washington. While the U.S. tries to negotiate influence through pressure, Canada builds it through alignment. Ottawa's credibility in multilateral settings gives Greenland and Denmark something Washington cannot easily match: a partner who reinforces their sovereignty rather than trying to override it. That creates real leverage for Canada, leverage that arrives quietly but changes the regional balance.
Europe's response has been decisive. Berlin and Paris have moved quickly to back Denmark and Greenland, strengthening the idea that the Arctic is an integral part of European strategic planning. Greenland and Denmark's joint visits across the continent show how rapidly this alignment is solidifying. Inside the U.S. government, the split is obvious. Some American officials are trying to soften the message, insisting the U.S. is focused on economic interests and Arctic stability. But Trump's public tone suggests frustration, not strategy. That division weakens Washington's position and makes allies hesitate. If U.S. intentions are unclear and subject to change at any moment, countries will naturally search for consistency elsewhere. And right now, that consistency is coming from Canada and Denmark.
What makes this moment particularly striking is how little Canada had to do to gain influence. The combination of Denmark's firm position, Greenland's independent voice, and Europe's renewed unity created a vacuum that Canada was perfectly positioned to fill. Carney's foreign policy has been built around reducing reliance on the United States and strengthening Canada's role in shaping multilateral rules, especially in the Arctic. Now, with Greenland choosing Denmark and Denmark choosing NATO, Canada becomes a natural connector, a country capable of stabilizing the Arctic conversation while maintaining credibility with both Europe and the United States. Washington is not frozen out, but it is no longer the dominant voice. And for the first time in years, Canada has room to shape the Arctic agenda without orbiting American priorities. The United States assumed that Greenland's strategic location would automatically translate into influence. Instead, Greenland shifted toward Europe, Denmark strengthened its alliances, and NATO, thanks partly to Canada's push, is building a more coherent Arctic posture. Canada and Denmark did not shut the door on the United States. They simply built a framework that rewards partnership over pressure, stability over improvisation, and respect over dominance. In doing so, they left Washington with fewer tools and fewer opportunities to steer the outcome. The question now is whether the U.S. can adapt to an Arctic defined by cooperation rather than coercion. And for Canada, a deeper question emerges. Is this the beginning of a lasting Arctic realignment, one where Ottawa becomes an essential broker between Europe, Greenland, and the broader NATO alliance? That is the shift worth watching.
What's happening in Brampton at the Stellantis facility is completely unacceptable. Stellantis made a commitment, a promise, to invest in that plant, to invest in Canadian workers. And our government expects them to honor that promise, full stop. We will always fight for auto workers.
In the city of Brampton, Ontario, the sound of industry has faded. The once busy Stellantis assembly plant, where generations of workers built cars with pride, now stands quiet. For thousands of Canadian families, that silence means uncertainty and a deep sense of betrayal. When the automaker confirmed it would move Jeep Compass production to Illinois, the news hit like a blow. But this time, Canada's government didn't simply express disappointment, it acted. Industry Minister Melanie Joly announced that Ottawa will launch a formal dispute resolution process against Stellantis, a move that could see taxpayer money recovered and production forced back to Canadian soil. Her message was clear: when a company takes public funds and walks away, Canada will make it pay. The announcement came after weeks of tension. On October 15, Stellantis revealed its plan to shift production south of the border, leaving hundreds of Canadian workers in limbo. Just a year earlier, that same company had accepted more than $100 million from Ottawa as part of a larger commitment to expand production at Brampton. For the government, it wasn't just a broken promise, it was a violation of trust. The automaker had been a cornerstone of Canada's industrial identity. During the 2008 financial crisis, Canadian taxpayers stepped in to save the company from collapse. Now, as the plant sits idle, many Canadians feel that the company has turned its back on the very people who once still buy it. Joly's response captured that frustration. Within days, she called the company's decision completely unacceptable, warning that Ottawa expected Stellantis to honor its commitments to Canadian workers. That statement marked a turning point, a declaration that the era of silent concessions was over.
We were clear. Stellantis is on the hook. On October 23rd, together with the Minister of Finance, we announced a 50% reduction in Stellantis' annual remission quota. That means Stellantis has 50% less of a market for its cars without tariffs in our country.
Behind Jolie's words was a rapid sequence of concrete actions. The day after the Stellantis announcement, she wrote directly to Antonio Filosa, the company's global CEO, to express the government's position. 5 days later, she summoned Stellantis Canada's chief executive to Ottawa for a closed-door meeting, attended by Ontario's Economic Development Minister Vic Fedeli and Unifor President Lana Payne. The message was unified. Canada expected accountability. On October 23rd, Ottawa followed through. The government cut Stellantis' annual duty-free import quota by 50%, a penalty designed to limit the company's access to the Canadian market. And by the end of that month, Jolie confirmed that the government would start the 30-day period of formal dispute resolution under the contracts signed with Stellantis. In practical terms, this means Canada is preparing to recover public money already dispersed, roughly $105 million so far, according to government documents tabled in Parliament. But the deeper meaning runs beyond finances. It signals that Canada is reshaping how it deals with global corporations. For years, Ottawa offered subsidies and tax breaks to secure jobs, often with little enforcement when those commitments fell through. Jolie's approach is different. She is using legal tools, not public appeals, to hold companies to their word. Her actions suggest a new industrial doctrine, one where public money must deliver public value.
The Stellantis case has become more than a business dispute. It is a national test of confidence. Canada's auto sector supports more than 550,000 direct and indirect jobs, according to Statistics Canada's 2024 industry report. In Ontario alone, the auto supply chain contributes nearly 13% of the province's manufacturing GDP. Losing even one major production line reverberates far beyond the factory floor, affecting suppliers, small businesses, and entire communities built around the industry. For the government, letting Stellantis walk away would send the wrong message, not only to workers, but to every company negotiating with Ottawa. The dispute resolution process shows that Canada will now defend its industrial interests through the rule of law rather than political pressure. This moment also strengthens the credibility of Canada's broader Buy Canadian vision, which Prime Minister Mark Carney unveiled earlier this year. The idea is simple. Public investments should reinforce domestic production and national resilience. Jolie's decision turns that principle into action. By holding Stellantis to account, Ottawa is setting a precedent for the upcoming 2026 USMCA review, where questions of investment and production commitments are expected to resurface. Canada's position is becoming clear. International agreements mean little if domestic jobs are treated as negotiable.
In Brampton, the reaction has been deeply personal. Workers who once celebrated the plant's future now speak about uncertainty, mortgages, and retirement plans suddenly at risk. Many have spent decades on the same assembly lines, weathering every economic storm since the 1990s. When Jolie visited the city last week, she met with employees who described what the closure meant for their families. She reminded them that Canada had stood by Stellantis through crises, from the 2008 bailout to the pandemic's production shutdowns, and that now it was the company's turn to stand by Canada. Her remarks resonated because they appealed to something larger than policy. For many Canadians, the Brampton dispute isn't just about jobs, it's about respect for labor, for taxpayers, and for a country that has often been treated as a secondary branch of North America's auto network. Beyond Brampton, the dispute sends a signal to multinational corporations that the Canadian market comes with expectations. Ottawa is making it clear that public investment carries obligations, not just profits. It also redefines Canada's role in a global economy increasingly shaped by protectionism and industrial realignment.
Instead of retaliating with tariffs or political threats, the Carney government is using contracts, transparency, and accountability to assert national strength. This approach contrasts with the noise of trade wars and aligns more closely with the country's image as a reliable but firm partner. Across Canada, opinion polls from Nanos Research in late October show growing public support for a tougher stance on corporate accountability, especially in industries that receive government funding. That sentiment cuts across political lines, uniting both labor groups and small business owners who believe domestic production is essential to the country's long-term prosperity.
The Stellantis dispute may take months to resolve, but its symbolic impact is already visible. It marks a shift from dependence to determination, from hoping companies will honor their promises to ensuring that they do. For the first time in years, Ottawa is treating a broken corporate commitment as a national offense, not a bureaucratic setback. The message is simple and unmistakable. Canadian jobs, paid for by Canadian taxpayers, deserve Canadian accountability. As the lights remain dim in the Brampton plant, there is also a quiet sense of unity building across the country. People who once felt powerless against corporate decisions now see their government standing beside them, not behind them. In that sense, this dispute is about more than a factory or a contract. It's about national pride, the belief that Canada's future will be written not by foreign boardrooms, but by the workers and communities who built its industries from the ground up. And if the government succeeds in bringing production back to Brampton, it will not just reopen a plant, it will reopen a sense of confidence that Canada, when pushed, can fight for itself and win.